Good morning and welcome to Kern Leadership Alliance. I am your host this morning. I'm Cheryl Giesbrecht-Turner, and we have an amazing morning planned for you. Would you bow with me for a couple minutes as we commit this time to the Lord in prayer? Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning, and we thank you for the community that we find in the body of Christ where we are connected. And thank you for your prayer in John 17, Lord Jesus, that says that we may be one as you are one. As you were talking to us and through your last dying request, Lord, that was your heart's desire for us as the body of Christ. So we commit this morning to you. Would your saints be empowered through the teachings and the tools that are presented? We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, we're Kern Leadership Alliance, and we are here to help you network with other believers, to give you opportunities to pray, connect, and serve along with other leaders for community transformation. The most pressing need, as we all know, is how are we going to reopen our businesses post-COVID-19? And so this morning, in an effort to move beyond the information that's already available to you and other sources, we have two experts to offer you insights and solid resources to assist you in moving forward. The first one, I'm happy to introduce John Beaman. He manages Merchant Masters Dallas-Fort Worth and assists the McGraw Council family of companies to conduct business in Texas in an effort to help more businesses achieve the American dream. I'm sorry about that. My coffee's kicking in this morning. It is well known that more than 80% of all businesses fail in their first year, yet even more businesses fail in the second and third year of operations. And this is where the McGraw Council seeks to make a difference by connecting businesses and resources. He attended Liberty University for his undergrad degree in business and economics, and he also has a master's degree in business administration and leadership. And then Chad Tongco, a board member of Kern Leadership Alliance, but also is the founder and CEO of Primaris Market Development, a full-service business development advisory firm that specializes in guiding middle-market business stakeholders to propel their brands to the forefront of consumer relevancy and demand. Chad has over 13 years of experience in operations and MA, Business Development Executive Level Management. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing and holds a certificate in Strategic Digital Marketing from Yale University School of Management, Executive Education Program, and Business Strategy Entrepreneurship in Emerging Economics from Harvard Business School. Welcome with me, John Beaman and Chad Tongco. And the title of their teaching time today is Venturing Forward, Conducting a New Way of Business in the Post-COVID-19 Era. Welcome with me, Chad and John. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Very kind introduction indeed. We're extremely blessed, John and I, to be able to join you all this morning and spend the next 45 minutes or so to talk about how we can venture forward and conduct a new way of business in this post-COVID-19 era. John and I are both excited that we're able to share a little bit of insight of how businesses can adapt, keep the doors open, as well as thrive in the long term. I think that we all have gone through an incredibly difficult and challenging time in the last 60 days, and we wanted to specifically note that through it all, there is one constant hope that we can get from Jesus. And so he is the only source, and so as we move forward in this morning's discussion, just be reminded that you are not venturing alone, that he is with you through it all, and that he remains faithful. So a quick note, this is an interactive webinar in which you will be able to post your questions in the comment box below. For the meantime, please take time to introduce yourself, what organization you are with, and the two most crucial challenges you are currently facing in your businesses today. I also wanted to note that John and I decided to embed and include verbatim on this presentation in case there were some technical issues that were to come about. We'd much rather have you capture the notes than miss them. So we apologize ahead of time for the redundancy of our words in what is presented on the screen. So thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of the entire board, we thank you for your resilience through this crisis. As business stakeholders, you are all heroes. You are all essential. 44% of the entire U.S. economy is contributed by you, your families, and your employees. 47% of our national workforce is hired by you. Your economic, societal, and communal contributions are invaluable to our country. Therefore, this series is most certainly dedicated to you, and for your business's well-being. The American ingenuity is time-tested, and I know that we will get through this together. So what is Venturing Forward about? Venturing Forward is about how we can identify and develop strategic frameworks that can be applied to your businesses in real time in order to attain sustainability in the post-COVID-19 era. Our primary goal is to identify strategies to keep your doors open, adjust and adapt to the new norm, and thrive in the long term. This is a 4-part series that will span throughout the summer from May through August, which will be held once a month. At the end of the series, you will have a comprehensive strategic frameworks in the topics of business strategy focused on consumer behavior changes, digital transformation, and financial management, all of which can be applied to your businesses in real time. So please mark your calendars, as the next webinar is scheduled on Thursday, June 25th at 7 a.m. And the topic of discussion will be business strategy focused on consumer behavior and changes. So why is it critical to start on the right foot? Because in highly volatile economic environments, unplanned and uncalculated risks could be the difference between survival and closing your doors for good. Therefore, it's imperative that you identify, develop, implement strategic frameworks that addresses both your short-term and long-term goals as well as needs. So in order for us to accomplish our objective this morning, we are going to start by identifying the basic principle of the economic relationship between buyers and sellers. Each topic will then be addressed from the conceptual lens of the term institutional void, which I will introduce in a few minutes. And then lastly, from there, we will begin to identify strategic frameworks that can be applied to your businesses in real time. So, understanding our current economic environment, to date, we have over 36 million unemployed Americans. Naturally, it would affect consumer spending as wages are directly affected. The sectors that are heavily affected by this most recent pandemic outbreak are restaurants, travel and leisure, transportation, hospitality, entertainment, supply chain, municipalities, and oil, as demand in all of them have virtually stopped overnight.
Can I quickly jump in there, Chad, on that slide? Something I'd really like to highlight for that next seminar webinar that you have coming up is that really unique concept of changes in consumer behavior. At some point, those 36 million people, the vast majority will come back to employment. However, as we are seeing in restaurants throughout the United States, travel especially, hospitality, those consumer behaviors are drastically changing, and the ways that businesses sold and marketed their products and services pre-COVID, they will definitely be very, very different because that consumer buyer experience will be changing.
Good point, John. So there's certainly some trends that are going to be forthcoming that we've yet to even see, and they'll come into existence in the next 2 to 3 months. But good point, John. To your point, there has been a pretty significant behavioral changes with regards to the consumer market. John, you do want to touch on the job impact that COVID-19 has done?
Please, absolutely. As the chart indicates, unemployment has definitely skyrocketed. A few of the most a few of the industries that have been hit the most: leisure and hospitality, wholesale and retail, education and health services. You can keep going all the way down. But something that I really want to really drive home, so to speak, even if you don't work in one of these industries, the ripple effects of this will have ramifications: supply and demand of labor, supply chains, service businesses. As a side note here, actually an important side note, as unemployment goes up, the supply of labor, and that means that the cost of labor is actually going to be coming down. So if you and your business are in a position for growth, now is the time to take advantage of that labor, because you're going to be able to get some fantastic labor steals, so to speak. In addition, even if you don't work in one of these industries directly, they will have this unemployment indicates some significant ripples. Let me give you an example. Even though a service business may not work in the hospitality industry, if they serve the hospitality industry or they serve the retail industry, you need to look at this data and say, cutting expenses big time. That likely indicates a dramatic decrease in output. That decrease in output means less revenue, which of course means less profit. That means expenses in other areas are going to have to be cut. So businesses that serve the hospitality industry, the retail industry, they're going to have to pivot some and find and fill demand, whereas they previously relying on those industries. In some states, California, New York, Michigan, those are still getting crushed. In states like Florida and Texas, they're opening up more. They're still not at 100% capacity, but they're opening up more. Businesses will want to find another source of demand for their products. And of course, supply chains. I mean, there are so many examples of supply chains getting really, really messed up. Agriculture is one of them. There are dairy farmers up in Wisconsin that had to literally dump their milk because they had a massive glut. They had so much supply, they literally couldn't take it. We also had a supply chain major league disruption in the oil industry. When we saw the shutdowns go into effect, literally everyone stopped driving. There was almost no demand for oil. There was a crazy day a couple of weeks ago for oil, Brent crude oil. You can look it up. It's on stock market history. It literally was negative $20 for a barrel of oil. It was cheaper. It was absolutely, I've never seen anything like it. It was unbelievable. And that supply chain is just one example of supply chains being disrupted. You see it in agriculture. You see it in the beef market. We actually serve a rancher out here in North Texas, and we were talking about supply chains. There is an interesting supply chain dilemma for grocery stores as beef is being limited. A lot of grocery stores are limiting the number of steaks that you can buy. And these are all just small examples of supply chains being disrupted. And it's not the last that we're going to be seeing of it. So businesses really need to adapt to those changes so that they can not only survive, but ultimately thrive.
Very good. Thanks, John. Very insightful notes with regards to how the unemployment and the current supply of demanded labor affects the supply chains and service businesses. Moving on to the next slide. So buyers and sellers in normal conditions typically have an unhindered access of engaging within their interactions. Typically in normal times, us as sellers have access to our consumers, and vice versa. Our customers have access to us with no hindrances or whatsoever. For example, when I need an impromptu tie while I'm traveling for business, which has happened multiple times in the past, I spill coffee on my tie and whatnot, I should be able to go into a Nordstrom or a Macy's to buy one and have no market-related hindrances to prevent me from doing so. However, under COVID-induced conditions, this basic buyer and seller principle has been abruptly disrupted, which leads us to the introduction of the term institutional void. Institutional voids are the gaps that exist in specific markets that serve as roadblocks to the ideal interactions and transactions of buyers and sellers. So, can you think of any hindrances at this point in your businesses right now that prevent you from engaging in that ideal interaction between you and your customers?
Can I provide an example on that, Chad? So we work in the finance industry. We work with banks as supplements to banks. Typically, we have a lot of face-to-face interaction. You get to shake them in the hand, shake their hand, we get to look them in the eye. We've had to go completely virtual, and that's been a major adaptation for us. We've been able to adapt, but that's just one example. I think you could look at retail stores as another one. We've worked with retail clients and their brick and mortar stores got closed down. I mean, they literally couldn't keep the doors open because of those shutdowns. However, they were able to establish an online presence, and thankfully they had one before this hit. So they were at least able to keep some of this going. And that again plays to your digital transformation and also changes in consumer behavior.
Very good. Yeah, one pretty good example of the hindrances that occurred would be also the restaurant industry. I think the industry in itself on a macro level pivoted rather quickly, which was impressive in the sense where deliveries and takeouts, even alcohol products have been allowed to be taken out. So I think that American ingenuity at the end, as we went through the restrictions and implementing them, really showed. And I think that it's only just the beginning, even though an institutional void has certainly emerged. I think that this is an incredibly awesome time for innovation to come forth. So let's spend a few minutes on institutional void. Impetus for business creation or establishment, as I previously mentioned, it's typically a really good time for innovation to come and take place. When there's a gap or a void in the market, entrepreneurs typically take a stand and they step in and they bring about their ingenuity and share it with the world. It serves as a platform for innovation and American ingenuity. On a normal basis, when we look at gaps and research for gaps, this is how it typically plays out, right? Market research, you do your market research, you then see gaps in the market that prevents consumers from having ideal access to a service or product. This gap then manifests in typically three specific forms. The first form of gap would be geographic gap, where a service or a product is too far from a buyer and seller. And so the primary issue here would be accessibility. And the perfect case study for this would be Starbucks. Starbucks ensures that they have little to no geographic gaps in their business model. There's virtually a Starbucks store in every retail plaza they could see, and they are all over the place. So they've done a really good job ensuring that they do not have that gap, a geographic gap in their business model. Another type of gap that typically emerges as you do a market research would be a service gap, where a lack of service or product exists in a specific business sector or market. This typically emerges when there is a shortage of supply and high in demand, which brings us to service industries like carpet cleaners or plumbers. These kind of industries typically come about when there is a service gap. And then last but certainly not the least, the passion gap. So this is typically when a person or a group of people who are passionate about specific craft, service, or product, or they're really good with it, and they decide that they will make this world a better place by starting their own business, right? A perfect example of this would be clothing retail, arts and entertainment. There's a lot of that now today. A good case study for a passion gap would be Spanx, who is still founder-owned 100% and founder-led, and that is Sarah Blakely. She has done a phenomenal job just really blowing her company up throughout the last 10 years. Another term for passion gap is social entrepreneurship, in which an entrepreneur decides to engage in an endeavor to enrich the lives of those who live within his or her community, region, or nation, or even global, on a global scale. So now that we've identified our problem, which is the disruption of the ideal interactions and transactions with our customers, that also consequently led to loss of revenue, loss of communication with our customers, depletion of financial buffers, uncertainty of the future of your business, loss of human capital and employees, we will now be able to address the issue by recognizing probable solutions, which leads us to the first topic of discussion, keeping our doors open. There are 4 fundamental components for a business to keep their doors open. First one is financial capital. the need for financial liquidity and solvency, being able to address your short-term obligations as well as your long-term. But in this case, in a time of crisis like this, it's more imperative, obviously, to deal with your short-term and be able to ensure that you have the liquidity to meet those needs and obligations. The second would be demand and customer flow, which equals to our revenues. Third, supply availability, the ability to deliver on the goods and services. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. As John mentioned a few minutes ago, that there has been a major disruption in our supply chain. How are we going to be able to navigate and ensure that our supply availability continues to be around for our customers? And then last but certainly not the least, human capital, the leadership to be able to ensure that the wheel keeps turning. So in this slide, as you see, in 2016, JP Morgan Chase held a survey throughout 600,000 small and medium-sized businesses across the nation. And it was a study or a survey with regards to how much cash reserves do these businesses typically have. So as a result, the medium small business only had about 27 days to cover in their cash reserves when they hit rainy days. But many Main Street businesses are lower than that. So as you can see in this slide, restaurants fall in the lowest category at 16 days of cash reserves, repair and maintenance at 18 days, retailers at 19 days, construction 20 days, professional or personal services 21 days, wholesalers at 23 days, so forth and so on. So as you could see, you could only imagine that we have been in the lockdown restriction or implemented lockdown restrictions for over 60 days, and the catastrophic effects of this we have yet to even really see. So a lot of our businesses certainly experience depletion of cash reserves. There's no doubt about it. And how we're going to bounce back is going to be an interesting sight to see and to unfold really in the next few months. So in the first component of how we can keep our doors open would be financial capital. And then at this juncture, I'd like to pass on the baton to John, if you will. John?
Of course, thank you very much. So one of the things I'd like to touch on real quick first again, as we're talking COVID and the unique situation that we're in, I really want to point out how different this is than, say, any other recession. For example, 2008. There was a fundamental underlying problem in that economy. In the case of COVID, we didn't have that. What we had was an artificial shutdown of the economy. So a lot of the concerns that existed in 2008, it doesn't apply here. It's not like we have an underlying real estate problem or an underlying housing problem. We could end up there, but that's not what caused this economic shrinkage, so to speak, or the supply chains that we're having. It was an artificial shutdown where everything closed down. That's never really happened before, especially for this extended time period. And so it's definitely presented some interesting financial challenges for companies when you're talking liquidity, cash flow, all the above. We went from normal business operations to literally shutting everything down within a week, literally overnight. One day, everything was open, restaurants 100% full. Within 24 hours, it was shut down. No more in-store eating. Retailers were pretty much shut down. So everything got flipped on its head, and that presented some unique financing issues. At that point, Congress stepped in, the federal government, and they passed a $2 trillion spending bill, stimulus package. A little less than 20% of that actually made it to small businesses. Thankfully, a lot of lines of credit were still available, but as Chad mentioned and pointed out in the last slide, most businesses don't have 30, 40 days to just sit on cash. Very, very few businesses have that. I mean, you can see in the chart, restaurants have only 16 days on average, repair and maintenance only 18. So the original 15 days of flat curve was already really stressing restaurants. And then when it had to go beyond that, it really pushed them to a very, very distressed financial position. And this is one of the things where, hypothetically, if there was no stimulus package, again, keeping in context that it was an artificial shutdown, those restaurants, hypothetically, would then run into a rent/mortgage problem where they're not paying the landlord, then that landlord has a problem, and that's where you start getting the cycle of really, really bad problems. So Congress stepped in and provided a massive increase of SBA loans. They issued the PPP, the Payment Protection Program. Can you go to the next slide, please? Pull up all the bullet points. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So here are some of the details on that. There are a lot of SBA opportunities. However, we've had a couple of people come to us and ask about them. If you have not requested an SBA as quickly as possible from your bank, the bank that you currently use, you're probably going to run into a problem. This is something that you got to get on right away. I know that they go quickly. A lot of people are already lined up. By the time you have to start shopping banks, you're already behind the eight ball. What we saw in North Texas, and I'm pretty sure this is a consistent trend across the country from what I've seen, heard, and read, banks will only help their clients, their current clients first. By the time they're done assisting their current clients, there's very little left. Now, an alternative option to that is that there are some CPAs that will help you go through that filing process so that the government would fund your business directly. It's obviously best, most efficient, and fastest to get your funding through your bank because they have all the information lined up. They have all your banking information, your personal information, so on and so forth. But in the event that your bank can't help you, let's say you waited a week or too long. I've known several businesses that did that, and they were like, I know I should have done it earlier, but I spaced it, I got busy. What can I do? Still looking for that SBA PPP option. You can try asking some CPAs. They might be able to help you get those filed. On that note, if you can't get that SBA or you can't survive until the SBA comes in, we've had situations where people get approval for the SBA, but it's not coming in for several weeks. And they're like, I'm fine for the next week or two, but I can't go 4 weeks until I get my SBA. That's where you can look at alternative financing. And that's, again, the important thing I really want to stress is alternative financing should be used as a supplement to banks when they cannot or will not help. Can you pull up the paragraph, please? One more click. Perfect. Thank you. So alternative financing can fund businesses when banks cannot or will not fund a business's financial needs, or when the bank cannot provide that cash fast enough. If a business is financially healthy, alternative financing is a viable option. Something I really want to stress, alternative financing, you really don't want to use it as your bread and butter. There are businesses that do. It's not recommended because of the cost. Getting a line of credit, getting an SBA loan, things like that, that's far more cost effective. However, there are unique situations when it simply doesn't work. There are situations when businesses don't fit within the bank's box, so to speak. And when that happens, that's when you look at alternative financing. Next slide, please. So alternative financing, there are a variety of different financing mechanisms that we're going to focus on for today. The first one is factoring. A lot of small businesses are familiar with this, especially in the trucking industry. Basically, factoring is selling an invoice that typically takes 30 to 90 days to get paid. So let me give you an example of this. Let's say you own a trucking company / transportation and you have a few FedEx or UPS routes. You've got everything signed, you've done the work. They just take 30 to 90 days to pay you because that's the way the industry works. In this financial crisis, you could say during COVID, if you've gone through the SBA process, you've gone through your bank, you've gone through your line of credit, but you're still a little cash short, it'd be nice to have a little bit of cash. You could very easily look at selling that invoice at a discount. So for example, if you have an invoice for $100, so for easy math, you could sell that invoice and get $97 within a couple of days. Tops. Yes, you're not getting the full 100, but if your cash flow need is that desperate, that is when you can look at factoring your invoices. Another prime example is if you might have payroll coming up. If you have a misalignment of cash flow and you're like, look, I've got good company, I've got good invoices, I just need a little extra cash. The bank can't help me here. I don't need, a $100,000 loan. I need 15 grand or 20 grand or some smaller number like that. That's when you look at factoring, selling invoices. Another financial mechanism is what's called a merchant cash advance, also known as MCAs. The difference between factoring and MCAs is that factoring is typically buying one invoice at a time. A merchant cash advance is buying a bundle of invoices. So let me give you an example. A trucking company with large invoices, high tickets, they're probably going to look at factoring. A restaurant, obviously, they're not selling, $20,000 jobs. They're selling 20, 30, 40, maybe $80 tickets. They would look at an MCA where they actually sell their receivable, their future credit card payments. So for example, let's say a restaurant processes, 100 grand every month. If they need a little injection of cash and they're like, look, we're good, we're solid, we just need a little extra, we need, call it 15 grand. They could sell 15 grand of their next month's credit card receivables and then get that 15 grand up fronted to them right off the bat. So that can be used very much as an emergency funding source, or if the bank isn't able to provide that cash, that's when you look at an MCA. And MCAs don't apply to just credit card payments. It could apply to a variety of industries. That's just the one that we commonly see. Another financing mechanism is equity buyouts. This can be tactical or strategic, and you really need to look at the details, and I'll explain why later. But equity buyouts definitely have a place. If you have a solid company and you can't quite get the line of credit you need, or the bank can't give you the funding fast enough, or something along those lines, you could look at an equity buyout. Even better, if you're approaching the point in your business, your dream's always been to build it up, to sell it off to either a private equity company or another owner. Maybe you got a friend you've been talking to, something along those lines. That's when you look at an equity buyout for a quick injection of cash. There are a lot of details to go through, but that's, again, something that you can make happen pretty quickly. That's also pretty unregulated. And that's something else I want to quickly highlight as we're going through alternative financing laws by each state. But as a general rule of thumb, alternative financing is much, much less regulated than banking and traditional financing. Alternative financing often falls under the realm of fintech. Some people have heard of it, some people aren't familiar with it. It's basically an acronym for financial technology. But equity buyouts, again, coming back full circle, definitely have a time and a place. Bridge financing. We've had a lot of questions on this. Let me give you an example of bridge financing. You might have a small business that filed for an SBA loan. They've gotten their application submitted. They've gotten approved for it, but it's not coming in for 6 weeks. They're a healthy company, but due to COVID, they're running low on cash. And they're like, I don't really have anything left in my line of credit. I don't really have anything left I can take out a loan. And I really don't want to take a loan for only 20 grand. I mean, the bank won't do that. I mean, there's just not enough profit in there. What can we do to get that cash to last until our SBA, which I've been approved for 100 grand? You could use that SBA as collateral, so to speak, and sell off part of that. You don't have to sell off the whole thing. You can very much say, tell you what, I got 100 grand coming in from the SBA guaranteed. I just need 20 grand for the next 4 weeks to keep things going. It is possible to sell 20 grand worth of that SBA, for lack of better terminology, and use that to bridge the gap. And that's what bridge financing is. And that technically something like that would be classified as an MCA or factoring. But bridge financing is a more overall term because you can do a lot of creative things with it. Next slide, please. Okay, very important things to watch in alternative financing. Alternative financing is significantly more expensive than traditional financing. If you're doing it over a 12-month period, it's not uncommon to be in the 30 to 40% annual interest rate. Now, you're not supposed to be on it that long, but if you annualize it over 12 months, that's pretty common. So when you're talking the terms of the deal, it is imperative that you know not only the rate, but also the length of time that you're discussing rate. For example, if someone says, yeah, I can alternative finance you and do 1.5%. Are we talking 1.5% per week, per month? What's the time frame there? Because those are two very different cost mechanisms. Alternative financing has a very bad industry reputation. There's definitely a time and a need for it, but you really need to watch everything closely because there are a lot of bad people and there are a few good people. Obviously, you want to find the good people in it, but read those terms very, very carefully. Another thing you want to watch out for, equity takeovers. One of the things that can happen is a business will start using short-term financing and they get hooked on it, almost like a drug. It's like, this just feels so good. I can get cash in, I can build it into my margins, I can get used to this real fast. You get paid faster, you get it up front, you're not losing profit because you build it into your margins. Well, what has happened in the past, you'll have a financing company say, here's your short-term financing deal, XYZ. Looks great, works great, and it is great. Then the company comes back again and says, we need more short-term financing. They come back 2 or 3 times. Then the financing company goes, okay, you're kind of making a habit out of this. We need some equity in it to make sure that things are running well. They're like, okay, that makes sense. And it does make sense. You do it a little bit more, and then they need more equity. You keep doing it, next thing you know, they have 50% plus one of your equity, and now you don't totally own the company. That has happened in the past, and you have to watch out for it, which is, again, not only why you have to read the terms of the deal carefully, but also work with someone that you trust. Another important component, when we're talking alternative financing in the realm of factoring and MCAs, those are not loans. That is technically purchasing an asset. And one of the biggest differences is the regulatory side. Lending is highly regulated. Purchasing an asset is very, very free still. So when you're talking, people throw terms around very loosely, like, oh, I'll loan you this, I'll loan you that. Make sure you know if it's a loan or an asset purchase, because that has major league ramifications for you and your business. Lastly, technically, I wouldn't advise it, but it is legal and possible to stack financing packages. You can have multiple short-term financing packages going on at once. The more you do, obviously, the less appealing you are to finance from the financer's perspective. Typically, what they'll do is they'll try to buy everything all up, put it all in one place, and then charge a higher rate for a variety of reasons. So yes, you can stack financing packages. We really don't recommend it. That really needs to be a very last resort, because the more you take on, underwriters see that and they get really hesitant about that. Next slide, please. Okay, so that brings us to this list. When would you consider using alternative financing? First and foremost, keep in mind, it's when the bank can't help. The first conversation should be with the banker. Hey, here's what I'm looking at. Can you help? Then you go to alternative finance. What does this look like? Typically, what we've seen a lot of time, it's matching payroll. You have payroll due in a week and invoices that are coming in 2 weeks. So what you do is you sell the invoices for 2 weeks, you get cash for payroll, and then you're off and running. No blood, no foul, easy come, easy go, you're solid. Another one is expansion for fast equipment purchases. Prime example, 2 restaurants neighboring each other. Maybe one's a Asian food, another is, say, Chinese and Korean. We'll use those. The Korean business ends up going under unexpectedly, and their equipment can be bought 10 cents on the dollar. Chinese restaurant could look at that and say, you know what, this is exactly a perfect opportunity. It's similar equipment. That's exactly what I need. And I can buy it right off the bat and double my revenue. That's something that alternative financiers really like, because it's for fast, quick, implemented growth. That is when you can look at alternative financing. Again, it's that fast turnaround. Cash flow, that's another reason. If you're having 30 to 90 days to get paid, that is a lengthy time for small businesses to wait for revenues to come in. So you can very easily sell those revenues off to get the cash faster. Yes, it'll be at a discount, but sometimes it's better to cash today can be worth more than cash in 30 to 90 days. Bridge financing, we've talked about that. You're financing a short-term time period. Equity buyouts, we've talked about that. Lastly, when you're unbankable, there are actually businesses that fall into the unbankable category. And one prime example is when they're just too young, or they had an unprofitable month and the bank doesn't want to give them a line of credit. Yes, alternative financing will be more expensive than a line of credit, but you can use it to build up credit history and build a good reputation so that the bank can then deem you bankable. And that's the goal of alternative financing. You don't want to live on it. You want to use it to get to a better place. Next slide, please. So in summary, alternative financing, it provides fast access to cash. You can get it literally from the moment you sign the document, you get cash in 24 to 48 hours. It's a great supplement to banks. It's not meant to replace banks. It's used as a supplement to banks. It's more flexible than traditional banking. It can help businesses move from unbankable to bankable, and that obviously has huge financial ramifications. And then lastly, it's meant to be used less than 12 months. You can use it on an ongoing basis. You can go up to 12 months for one financial short-term deal. You really don't want to go beyond that. If you're going beyond that, there are other conversations that you want to have with a business consultant or your financer and say, hey, how do we get off of this? Because you really don't want to live on it. But in summary, Chad, that's kind of what alternative financing is, how it can be used. And those are some of the situations when you would look.
Very good. Moving on to our customer flow and journey. Thank you, John, for the insight. In order for a customer flow to occur, which we identified earlier as our revenue stream, we need to be able to have a comprehensive branding, marketing, and communication plan. It's incredibly imperative. Wanted to note specifically that acquiring new customers can cost brands up to 7 times more than keeping old ones. Let me repeat that. Acquiring new customers can cost brands up to 7 times more than keeping old ones. So brand loyalty is really the way to go. To survive in today's economic environment, an organization must be willing to undergo a digital transformation process and establish strategic digital communication channels, such as social media, email, Zoom, Skype, Google Meet, Slack, FaceTime, etc. Consider these statistics, if you will. Facebook currently today has 1.69 billion users, Instagram 112.5 million users, Twitter at 330 million users, LinkedIn at 610 million members. Additionally, people use their phones about 150 times a day, with an average session that lasts only 70 seconds. It's in these intent-rich micro-moments when decisions are made and preferences are shaped. It's also during these digital micro-moments that brands have the potential to be most useful and meet the needs of potential customers. So as you can see here on this slide, majority of our consumer and access to consumer, accessibility consumer, is really now digitally done. It's now online. And so for businesses who remain offline, if you will, and not have a lot of traffic or business coming from an online platform, you can get easily left behind, especially with what COVID-19 has done, and simply just catalyzing and accelerating digitization across the globe. So companies typically who are agile enough would end up capturing the higher percentage of market share, usually land within the top 10%, 5 to 10% of that market share, just because of their willingness and agility to go through digital transformation. In addition to that, it is imperative to know your customer journey framework to create a valuable customer experience. Right now, it's all about the added value that you can give to customers. Everyone's so embedded or rather saturated with ads that are ongoing literally 100 million times a day, across the globe. And so the customer journey starts when the customer decides they need a product or service, right? And considers an initial list of brands. It continues through selection and purchasing process. The customer's experience while using the product then determines how they think about the brand in the future. Information can be captured at different points in this process and then used to gain insights into the overall experience of the consumer. The next slide is a representation of what a typical digital customer journey looks like. I'm going to move this real quick out of the way so you could see. So the journey begins from a trigger. A trigger then moves on to the initial consideration stage, in which a consumer may look at reviews, what we call online word-of-mouth reviews, and then go through additional PR-related touch point from an organization, and then paid media, going through search engine optimization, and then an active evaluation stage. So it's, as you could see there, from initial consideration to step 2 of active evaluation stage, a consumer or a customer have already gone through 5 different touch points from brands all across the globe, or brands that they're currently considering and buying from. And then we move from active evaluation stage to moment of purchase, in which at that point a sales rep would get involved, possibly within the store, and then or a mobile site. And then we move on to post-purchase experience, which we see promotionals, social network, email. That's where the reviews come in, which would have an exponential effect on negative reviews, right? The social media, Yelp, all those platforms has significantly empowered the consumer to be able to have that direct interaction with other consumers. And then also the trigger. So it goes back to the trigger, it loops back to the trigger up to the initial consideration stage. Now consider the loop that is indicated under the loyalty portion. That loyalty loop is much shorter and much more efficient than having to go through the entire cycle altogether. And this is why it can cost brands up to 7 times more to acquire new customers than retaining old ones.
During the pandemic, Chad, how important or rather maybe the question is, could you elaborate a little bit on the importance of client retention during a pandemic like this in comparison to having to purchase new clients?
Yeah, retention is going to be key. And as we identified earlier, great question, John. The biggest institutional void, or the void that is left by this COVID-19 restrictions, is our inability to be able to have that interaction, that seamless interaction that typically takes place between us and consumers. So during this time, it's incredibly critical, especially as we transition into the reopening phase. It's incredibly critical to rekindle that communication line between you and your customer. You're constantly talking with them, constantly updating them as to how your services are going to be relevant to them today as the markets reopen back up. It was also incredibly important for this to occur during the shutdown process, more so than it is now. Because at which point, as things start to open up, the clients already know exactly what you are going to be offering. And so this is so critical to today, and that's why digital transformation is so key. So if your business is not, accessible online, or you don't have any digital footprint or whatsoever, it's going to be really difficult to survive in the post-COVID-19 era, and much more to thrive in it. And so, you keep that in mind. I think that it would be of your organization's best interest if you prioritize digital transformation moving forward. So in the forthcoming webinars, we will certainly be dedicating an entire session in identifying and developing a plan for your organization to undertake a digital transformation initiative. So we will help you develop a framework to be able to apply to your businesses in real time. And so we look forward to certainly doing that. We move on to supply availability. There has been a significant disruption in the global supply chain due to the pandemic outbreak. Therefore, it's critical to identify and develop a strategic framework to ensure sustainable supply availability remains. Components of the framework should include at least 3 tiers of suppliers, manufacturers, also consideration of time value as it relates to supplier location, and then last but certainly not the least, integration of framework within your organizational silos. You need to be able to ensure that there's fluidity in the communication between your internal silos, whether it's marketing, lead management, sales, operations, and finance. John, you'd want to speak a little bit more into this?
Please, thank you. I think you really summarized it really, really well. Especially during a pandemic, you never want to put all of your eggs in one basket. We talked about supply chains earlier, the oil market, the agricultural market, the labor market. These have all been disrupted on a massive scale. If you look at different industry trends and activity, there are industries that were down 60, 70%, and they weren't restaurant or retail. I mean, we're talking like the Dallas Federal Reserve put out some articles, I think it was in mid-March. Transportation, trucking, they were down substantially. Why is that important for suppliers and manufacturers? That's your distribution. That's getting your product or a part of your product from point A to point B. If there's a disruption in that and you're solely dependent upon that, then you got a real problem. And that's why I think you're spot on when you're saying, hey, have at least 3 tiers of suppliers and manufacturers. Always have options at your disposal. You may never have to resort to them, but you can't afford to be in a position where it's like, right now I'm toast. I've got nothing. Now what do I do? By then it's already too late. You're behind the 8 ball. Time is money. You only have 24 hours a day. It's one of the few things that you can't really buy. I mean, you can buy additional labor. You can buy scale. You can buy it with good marketing. You can buy visibility, but you can't buy time. You have. And that's something, again, when you have a chance to create time, advantage of that right off that efficiency. And then, like you said, integrating framework. We've talked about Primaris and the marketing and that thing. And you can speak to the whole fragmentation side. There are so many areas within businesses that are so fragmented. Those that are more fragmented during a pandemic are much less likely to survive, simply because there's too much fragmentation. There's not this seamless communication stage 1, stage 2. It's not connected. It's all over the place. And when you have that, any disruption creates this massive explosion of problems, and you can't get to where you want to go.
Yeah, that's a great point, John. And what often happens in small, medium-sized businesses is typically they invest in a particular initiative that entails growth and business development, and they heavily focus on the marketing side and the CRM side without having the right platform or integration between the two. And so what typically happens is the marketing spend then becomes almost null and void because the ROI, or I'm sorry, because of the leads not converted through lead management, and lead management division is not talking with the sales division, so forth and so on. And it just creates an entire ecosystem full of issues internally, which obviously at this point would really cripple an organization. Human capital, keeping our doors open as we move forward to down our list. The current spike of unemployment leads to a surplus of labor supply, which should naturally mean that labor can be attained at a lower cost. However, it's definitely been circulating that individuals have been deferring employment as governmental subsidies have been higher than their previous normal wages. So, therefore, identifying and developing incentive compensation levers may be necessary to attract talent.
Can I jump in here?
Yes.
We've seen this in Texas very, very frequently, especially in labor-intensive industries like restaurants. And the federal government is currently working on, I think they're very, very close to resolve. A lot of times it's more cost-effective for someone to remain unemployed than it is to work at, say, for example, a restaurant, but only at 25% capacity. These are labor issues that businesses have to deal with. And getting the right people on the team is absolutely essential. Very often, businesses look at HR, employment as an expense. Just because you categorize it as an expense in accounting does not mean that it is unimportant. It is a huge investment. I mean, John Maxwell said you got to get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off. If you have the right team, which is easier said than done, but once you get that right team together, then your business can thrive. And right now, as you mentioned, this is the time to build your team. You can get great labor, very talented labor at a much lower cost than you normally would right now.
Very good. So other considerations may also include reconfiguring zoning rates to align with organizational needs, consider long-term effects past 12 months when designing your labor models, health and safety of your workforce, especially right after COVID-19 and the reopening stages, and then keeping inclusion and diversity as priority. And I'm going to spend just a couple minutes on diversity and inclusion. Studies done by McKinsey & Company show that most diverse companies are more likely to outperform less diverse peers on profitability. So here is a slide that I'd like for you to see. In the business case for diversity in executive teams, and this also echoes throughout the entire organization and not just within the executive level, diversity when it comes to gender matters. As you can see, from 2014 to 2019, there's a steady incline or increase of profitability that occurs there, from 15% all the way up to 25% when it comes to gender diversity. And then in terms of ethnic diversity, we're looking at a significant amount of profitability difference right there at 35, 33, and 36%. So it's pretty constant considering that firms and companies that have a diverse workforce would have an extremely high or a much significant profitability model in terms of revenue. Let me move here. Just like in the forthcoming sessions, we will further delve into developing a comprehensive strategic framework addressing human capital in the forthcoming sessions. Adjusting and adapting to the new norm. It takes 21 days for a person to develop a habit. Given that the lockdown restrictions have been in effect for more than 60 days, consumer behavior and spending may have been affected. Therefore, it is important that during these reopening phases, you reanalyze current market conditions to identify consumer spending and behavioral changes. Once identified, an organizational infrastructure must be put in place in order to implement sustainable strategies in meeting unmet customer needs. Again, I'm going to circle back into ensuring that your organizational silos have a seamless interaction with one another, that they're able to communicate. One platform communicates with another. Typically, it happens with CRM, right? When lead management comes in play, oftentimes the fragmentation occurs between the CRM and the sales division, and they're unable to meet eye to eye with regards to what the customer really needs. And that happens so often to where you spend so much money on the marketing end only for it to dwindle in the lead management and the sales side, more so in the lead management side. So it's incredibly important that you address this and ensure that you have the right infrastructure in place in order for you to adapt to the consumer behavior, the current market conditions. This is, quite frankly, where digital transformation comes in place, as it will enable your organization to better understand your consumer, add more value to your consumer, develop and implement strategic frameworks that enhances customer experience, increase efficiency in your operations, increase profitability, better control marketing spends, and then gain thorough insights that can be used to develop your growth initiatives and overall business expansion plans. Your KPIs and analytics will speak volumes as to what you need to do in order to pivot during this transition phases. I also wanted to specifically note that not having the right infrastructure in place and not having access to analytics and the digital platforms that are currently present in today's market will literally push back a company or an organization by years. What I mean by that is they're going to lose out on a pretty significant amount of revenue opportunities and to gain new clients, because, as you know, digital now is such a huge part of the consumer, of our lives in general, that these big tech companies and even software companies have significant data that tells companies about consumer behavior. And so I encourage you to really delve in, if you haven't, into looking or into addressing the digital transformation and ensuring that your company goes through that within the next month or so. Thriving in the long term will also depend on your organization's agility to adapt to current market conditions. COVID has accelerated the move for digitization, and consumers are more volatile today than ever. This is due to decreasing brand loyalty, as digitization and omnichannel accessibility exposes them to more touchpoints and interceptions from competitors than in the years past. A perfect example for this would be consumers in the past, just in the 2008-2010 timeframe, typically would have about 3 different interceptions or touch points from different brands. Now, a typical consumer would have about 7 touch points from brands all across different channels, digital channels. So there is a massive competition to gain consumers' attention out there. However, word of mouth endorsements are less likely to be swayed by such interceptions. Word of mouth, again, this is where customer loyalty comes in. It's incredibly important that you stay in touch with your customers and ensure that you continue to meet their needs during this time and moving forward. Which also leads me to the relevancy of your service. Once you have identified consumer behavior changes and market condition changes, your organization needs to be agile enough to be able to pivot your services to meet their needs and ensure that the relevancy of your service remains applicable to consumers today, specifically add value to them. So the organizations who best understand their customers' journey is more likely to secure higher levels of market share than those who fail to integrate digitization in their companies. In essence, we'd like to close out with saying that this is definitely an exciting time. We've got a pretty long runway, ahead of us as to how we can recover, how quickly we can recover. The amount of damage that the shutdown has done to our supply chain is concerning. We typically, on a supply chain model, there are typically 5 different tiers. It goes as deep as 5 different tiers, and all 5 tiers have been disrupted and significantly because of the global shutdown. John alluded to it perfectly earlier. The global economy was essentially shut down overnight, within a 24-hour period, and that has never happened before. And it's not like the economy is a mechanical tool that you can just restart. It's an organic being. It takes organic movement, organic growth, in order for it to gain back its momentum. And so I also, wanted to specifically note to not lose heart. I wanted to share that, my family, my parents started their business, Southern California Medical College, at the height of the recession in 2008, and were able to grow. And this is because, first and foremost, God remains in the throne, and His will always be done, no matter what. And so do not be discouraged. If you are going through extremely difficult times now, feel free to reach out to myself and John. We'd be more than happy to help walk you through whatever issues or concerns you may have, and perhaps give some insight as to how we can help solve the current challenges that you are currently facing. But do not be disheartened. We do have the one true hope that continues to sit in the highest of high thrones, who is also the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and his name is Jesus. So with that being said, we definitely look forward to spending more time with you in the upcoming webinars. Again, please take note on your calendar. I'm going to go back there real quick, and I believe it was June 25th, and that's a Thursday. It starts at 7 a.m., and we will be discussing the topic of business strategy with focus on consumer behavior changes. So if you wanted to reach out to John and I, we wanted to share our information with you, and that is Tongco@primarisglobal.com and John Beaman @merchantmaster.com. So please feel free to take note of our email addresses, touch base at any given time, and we'd be more than happy to help you. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to spending more time with you in the forthcoming webinars. God bless.